Okay, great. Thank you all for your patience. This has been a long but very rich day of discussion, and I think we're ready to proceed. And I apologize to our guests from the 4 accrediting agencies for probably throwing your schedules. Hopefully, you're not going to miss flights tonight, but in the interest of doing the people's business, it sometimes is difficult for us to adhere to a time frame. I want to ask everyone, I'm Sharon Levine, President of the Medical Board of California, and we are now calling to order the session of the full board, the first session of the full board during this board meeting. I would ask everyone to turn off their cell phones and for board members to try and take them off the table because they interfere with the communications technology. Board members may be using laptops to access the information for the board meeting. We have a designated time on the agenda for public comment, both for items not on the agenda, which I will call for, and then I will ask for public comment on each agenda item. If I forget to do so, I can count on my loyal counsel to remind me, I know. And if not, anybody feel free to wave your hand and remind me that I've forgotten this. And I would ask, particularly given the time, that speakers limit their comments to 3 minutes. Our hope is to end today, I guess around 6, and reconvene tomorrow at 9 a.m. And we only have really a single agenda item, or a couple of agenda items for this afternoon. So we will, one large agenda item, and we will proceed, and we are very interested in hearing the presentations of the 4 accrediting agencies. So I will call the meeting to order now and ask Ms. Toof to please call the roll call.
Dr. Bishop?
Here.
Dr. Diego?
Here.
Dr. Gonadev?
Here.
Dr. Lowe?
Here.
Ms. Pines?
Here.
Dr. Solmonson?
Here.
Ms. Shipsky? Mr. Serrano-Sewell?
Here.
Ms. Yaroslavsky?
Here.
Dr. Yip?
Here.
And Dr. Levine?
Here.
Thank you.
And we have a quorum. So can I ask if there are public comments on items not on the agenda? I don't have any slips at this point. Okay, then we will proceed to approval of the minutes from the January 31, February 1 meeting. We have received an email correction on the minutes from one of our members of the audience whose name was misspelled. And so we need to replace the correct spelling for Carol Gottstein. And we replaced the 2 T's in her name with a D. So we will make that correction. And any other additions, corrections of the minutes from our last board meeting?
Move to approve the minutes.
Second.
Any?
Dr. Levine, just one quick thing. On page 10, you misspelled, or somebody misspelled Assemblymember Huesol's name.
Uh-oh.
Thank you.
That's a
No.
good thing to do.
Not in a public document.
Right.
Did we promote him though?
He is now a senator.
Exactly.
Oh,
What the amendment encompasses any spelling changes that need to happen, the motion and my second.
thank you. A blank check.
Yeah.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Great, then we're going to move on to presentations by the accrediting agencies, and we're going to start with a background and introduction by Mr. Hepler and Mr. Warden.
Okay, so today's presentation is about Outpatient Surgery Center, and our presentation that Mr. Hepler and I are providing is some general background information. It's in your packet under Agenda Item 4. We are going to start with the, in your packet, you have a very, well, not totally detailed, but very detailed memo from myself regarding the outpatient surgery centers, and our presentation is sort of a very condensed highlight of that. And basically, Mr. Hepler is going to get to start off first, and we have all 4 of the accreditation agencies here to do their presentation to the board, and it just gives you a background of how the accreditation agencies and outpatient surgery center accreditation sort of came about.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. It's my pleasure, Madam President and members, to discuss this issue. So when we talk about outpatient surgery centers, and there's some common understanding that this is a relatively new issue, I just wanted to point out that the legislature, in fact, in 1994, the chief policy-making organ of this state, did in fact say that the legislature finds and declares that there may be some things going on in regulated hospital, out-of-hospital settings. The legislature further finds and declares that these, paraphrasing, need some oversight. So there is some historical background for outpatient surgery settings. Next slide, Mr. Warden, if you wouldn't mind. So where the rubber meets the road as far as the physicians are concerned is basically Section 2216 of the Business Professions Code. And again, I'm not a physician, I'm an attorney. And so I'll just paraphrase this. It says no physician and surgeon shall, without getting into my definition of anesthesia, shall essentially not perform procedures requiring a level anesthesia, that of a general, unless these procedures are done at a setting that is enumerated in Section 1248.1. And so the upshot of this is the determining the threshold question is, what's the level of anesthesia, number one, and number two, what's the setting? So what's the level of anesthesia, what's the setting? So again, 1248, the common thread, if not going to read it to you because I know time is the essence, an outpatient surgery setting essentially means you're administering anesthesia at a level where the loss of life, there's a risk of the loss of the life-preserving resources. Again, from my understanding, that's not conscious sedation, that's not a local, that is into general anesthesia. And again, please feel free to correct me at any time that I fully misunderstand or misapprehend the proper level of anesthesia. So the required settings enumerated in 1248.1 essentially are 2 of them for the purposes of our discussion. Subdivision D says any primary care clinic license under subdivision A and any surgical clinic license under subdivision B of section 1204. And then the import of that is when they talk to who's going to license those facilities, let me unequivocally state it's not the medical board. That's the Department of Public Health. That's, we have the us and theirs or the Hatfields and McCoys or who's with us and who's against, it's us and them. Those are in fact their facilities, okay? They license those facilities. Now, moving down to subdivision G, an outpatient surgery setting accredited by accreditation agency approved by the division pursuant to the chapter. In order to simplify matters, let's consider those our settings. They're not our settings like we license them. They're our setting like they're approved. The accreditation agencies that we approved have essentially accredited them. Okay? So we have 2 sets, one issued a license by DGS and the other being accredited by accreditation agency that we approved. So again, 2 sets. So outpatient surgeries essentially are authorized in one of the following ways. As I just said, they're either licensed by DPH, they're accredited by an agency that we approve, or they fit another statutory classification. And I'll just mention a few. They're a tribal clinic, they're a Medi-Cal certified Medicare provider, they're an institute of the federal government, stuff that are specifically enumerated. They operate outside of DPH's licensure and outside of our accreditation. Well, things were going along swimmingly to some extent, I guess, with that 94 statute. And then there became an issue that arose, and that issue was Capon v. Shuri, a 2000 Court of Appeal case that stood for the proposition, if you will, that under the differentiation or the discrete logic of DPH's licensing and the medical board's approval of accreditation agencies, Capon essentially stood for the proposition that if, in fact, an outpatient surgery center had any part of physician ownership, that is, in part or in whole, DPH would not license them. And where that had the practical effect of taking a relatively small number of accredited sites and throwing a whole bunch in there, because now physician-owned OSCs were calling us saying, DPH won't license us. We need a license for reimbursement. We need a license to issue drugs, to stockpile drugs, all that sort of stuff. What can we do? And the what can we do fell into, you can become accredited by one of the accreditation agencies approved by the board. So I don't have the statistics, but I'm presuming that the number of accredited outpatient surgery centers sort of spiked in 2008, 2009, late 2007, as we and Department of Health Services had to deal with the ramifications of CAPN. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Warden, who can speak to the rest.
Okay, for the medical board to do outpatient surgery accreditation for accreditation agencies, we had to develop the regulations in order to implement the laws that were created. And we did that through the regulation process, and those regulations can be found in California Code of Regulations, Title 16, Division 13, Sections 13.2 through 13.6.
Okay, so as we go through this, I just want to keep three primary concepts in mind. These are all important. An OSC at a surgery center is a place. It's a place, I talked the last time, I guess my analogy was lost, it's a bricks and mortar place, but it's a fixed location and an address. Like I said, if we had a vehicle with a GPS, we could drive there, okay? I want you to contrast that, to the next slide, Mr. Warden. I want you to contrast that to a personal license like the one that the physician and surgeons have on this board and the one that Ms. Shipsky has. And this is a personal license that follows around just like my law license follows me around. I can say brilliant things in Blythe. I can say brilliant things in Alturas, San Francisco. I can even say them here, and I can say them in my office because it follows around. Okay, that's not the case with an outpatient surgery center because, again, that's a place. We have the accreditation agencies accredit a place, not a license, okay? And I recall that a license is in fact something that is essentially a provisional grant of authority. It allows you to do something that if you didn't have the license, you can't do. So we have the difference, accreditation or license of a site versus the personal license that a physician and surgeon has. So, Mr. Warden.
Okay, so the following is some of the common questions we get, and one of them is, does the Medical Board of California license outpatient surgery settings? The answer is no. The Medical Board of California indirectly oversees outpatient surgery settings. And how does it do that? The board approves the agencies that accredit the outpatient settings. So the next question is who can operate, manage, conduct, or maintain an outpatient surgery setting? And that is an association, a corporation, a firm, partnership, or an individual person. And that's specified in Health and Safety Code, Section 1248.1. Who's exempt from accreditation agencies? An ambulatory surgical center that is certified to participate in the Medicare program, any clinic conducted, maintained, or operated by a federally organized Indian tribe or tribal organization, and any clinic directly conducted, maintained, or operated by the United States. Any primary care clinic or surgical clinic licensed under Section 1204, and any hospital's facility licensed as a general acute care hospital. Outpatient surgery settings where analgesics, anesthesias, are administered in compliance with the community standard of practice and doses that do not have the probability of putting the patient at risk for loss of life or protective reflexes. The powers of the board. The board approves the accreditation agencies. The board may inspect outpatient surgery settings and shall investigate complaints. The board shall evaluate, approve, accreditation agencies not less than every 3 years. The board may terminate the approval of an accreditation agency, and the board, under certain circumstances, may seek injunctive relief. The board grants approval to an accreditation agency upon the accreditation agency submitting an application and the necessary fee, the required supporting documentation, and then board determining that the materials submitted indicate that accreditation agencies meet the minimum requirements set forth in relevant sections of the California Health and Safety Code and the California Code of Regulations. Outpatient surgery setting accreditation requirements. Outpatient surgery settings must meet the minimum requirements pursuant to Health and Safety Code 1248.15 and California Code of Regulations Section 1313.4 to be eligible for accreditation by a Medical Board of California approved accreditation agency.
And I know, Madam President, members, I know you all want to hear from don't want to hear from us and want to hear from the accreditation themselves. And it's my understanding that all four are present here and will be coming up shortly. I think it's important to remember that our statutes speak to the agent that the outpatient surgery center must be accredited or licensed or fit into one of those other statutory classifications. We, as a medical board, in the absence of a statutory obligation or a statutory mandate, do not rank these agencies about who's the best and who's the worst. Just like we do not rank physicians. If you call up the medical board, we won't tell you who's a really good physician. If you call up the state board of California, they won't explain what my score was on the state bar exam and how I miraculously passed. Okay? They are equal. Okay? If someone would call and inquire which agency, which accreditation agency have been approved, we would say 4 have been approved. An outpatient surgery center may choose one of the 4 approved to become accredited by one of the 4 approved agencies for whatever reason. They may have an advertising plan. They may have a business model. They may have a business plan. They may have economic considerations. They may have some other consideration that the board is not aware of. But our inquiry essentially stops when we say, is this accreditation agency approved? And if the answer is in the affirmative, essentially that meets our obligation. That meets the statutory obligation to perform procedures that require that level of anesthesia in an approved, accredited setting. Because, like I said, from our perspective, if the setting itself is accredited by one of our 4 approved agencies, then it has satisfied the statutory obligation. And with that, I will yield to any questions, and if you don't want to hear from us, I suppose we won't hear from.
Yeah, so are there, Mr. Serrano-Sewell and Ms. Yaroslavsky?
Thank you. I actually do have questions of staff before we hear presentations. And that has to do with, just broadly speaking, and I think they more pertain to legal, but they're also staff questions. So this is a window right now in which staff was reviewing their applications to be an accredited agency, right? That's my understanding. We're going through this application process right now.
We're going through the renewal process.
The renewal process right now, for which they file an application, for which we can deny their renewal status if, in fact, they have not stated or articulated a plan that is responsive to the information that we need. I'm speaking to the website now. The information we need to put on the website. That is one of the things that they have to do, but it is an important one. So my question is, it's a statement, right? If we're not getting this information, and we've acknowledged that some of these accrediting agencies are in noncompliance. We've said that in a sunset report. Right. So what are we going to do through this application process to be very direct to the accrediting agencies that within their application, if it is insufficient or it doesn't get to compliance, we won't approve them, or we'll find them in noncompliance and begin that process to revoke their status?
again, I don't know the procedural aspect of where we are. From a purely legal perspective, if in fact the board wanted to terminate an agency's approval, we would of course have to have cause. That's also an APA-style proceeding. So it would be the same thing, probably the accusation being the mechanism or the failure, whatever document indicating that they are not in compliance, and then they would have a hearing, the usual process set forth in the Administrative Procedure Act. So if you, I don't know the bulk, I don't know the scope of your question.
Well, it has to do with if the agencies aren't giving us the information that we need,
Okay.
for whatever reason, but they're not.
Okay.
And we view that as a problem. And going forward, we state clearly, if you don't give us the information we need, we view that as being in noncompliance. Therefore, we will issue a noncompliance letter and begin the Administrative Procedure Act to revoke your status as an accrediting agency. And I would think it's through this application process that we can be very clear what our intentions are. Is that your understanding of the process as well?
The renewal process just went out to the accreditation agencies within last week. In that request, it is asking for them to provide us all the information that's required, and then for the missing information that they have, to give us a timeline when that is. We have given them a guideline of when that timeline we expect them to do that, so that we have that. We also are going to try to assist the agencies in providing us with that information by identifying what each agency is missing from each accredited center. We have run into a little snag in doing that, so we're going to have to try to get that out to them, we hope within next week. But we're doing these steps to get that information. They have been providing us information slowly and more, but we're still not in total compliance, as you stated. And we're trying to get to that total compliance.
Well, when's the timeline to get in total compliance?
Well, as I previously said, we're asking for all the information to be submitted to us by the end of May.
So you can't
or a
answer-
or a timeline when they think they can have that, so we can evaluate whether or not we believe their timeline is reasonable or not. But the process that they go through for renewal is sort of lengthy, and we have to give them enough time to fill out the information that they would normally provide us, in addition to the stuff that is required as the passage of SB 100, which is a lot of the information was not collected previously, and so they've been working on collecting that information. So we're in that process, and we'll be working on that, and like I said, we have decided that we might try to help them with identify that, but when we tried to run our report from our system, there was a flaw in it. So our ISB people are working on that with our licensing manager, who's in charge of overseeing outpatient surgery centers. So we hopefully will be able to provide that information to them, which will help expedite their providing us the information. Our goal is to get it as quickly as possible, and that's where we're at.
I'll stop because my other colleagues want to talk. Okay, but so you just saw my position, right? My position is full compliance sooner. The laws have been in the book for some time. I understand snafus need to be worked out, but I'm putting the pressure on because really, once that approval is given, you've got to walk through the process to take it back, versus just denying the application because they haven't submitted a reasonable plan to get the information.
They're already accredited, so it's not as a new person applying. They still have the renewal process is to see if they're still complying.
All right, okay.
So it's a little bit different, but it still requires, we would have to notify them that they don't meet their compliance and that we're disapproving them, and then they have the administrative process to appeal it.
I understand that. That's fine.
Okay.
That's available to anyone.
Ms. Yaroslavsky?
So I have a couple of questions. One question would be, I understand that Health and Safety Code has the language in it of what allows someone to be accredited. Have we ever taken a look at that, or should we be taking a look at it, or who should take a look at it to see if it meets today's needs and necessities, number one? So should we have the expectation of uniform standards of being the minimum standard? and at what level. But I don't know what's in the health and safety code. I don't need to know what's in the health and safety code. But I know that it was done a long time ago. And my concern is that with the practice as it has evolved of using surgery centers, my concern is that it may in fact not be meeting the needs. So to the next question, you can figure out that answer. My question is, if a new company were to come into business and decide, I want to do this, I can evaluate as well as the next person, there's money to be made, how do we determine what should be, if they can do that, what in fact should be the criteria that allows that entity? The only place we have to hold them on is on that renewal process. So how do we know today that those renewals that are going on to existing, how do we know that we're not just keeping to kick that can down the road, that in fact that the laws that are on the books are up to date and they apply to the needs and meet the needs of today's community? Maybe that's the...
Well, to answer your question about whether somebody wants to become an accredited agency, there's an application process for that also with a fee, and all that requires a complete application, lots of supporting documents. Once staff would review all that, determine whether or not they think staff would be appropriate for staff to bring it to the board for recommendation for approval, that would be a board's decision at that point in time. Renewals are done a little bit differently but that's still an application process, unlike a personal license,
Right.
Where it's not an application process. So that's where we're at. Each of the accreditation agencies, the Health and Safety Code states the minimum requirements, and they're pretty detailed. But each agency can add to that if they choose to, depending on the type of surgery center that they're accrediting. It's the responsibility of them to make sure. It's also the responsibility of the physician who's using the accreditation agency to ensure that the facility meets the needs of the patient's care and the surgery procedures that they're doing, because ultimately the physician is the one responsible for the patient's care. And so it would be unwise of a physician to go do a surgery in a center that is not set up to do that type of surgery, because the outcome would probably be not good. And they're not only are they jeopardizing the patient, but they're jeopardizing their own license.
So the issue is how to not be reactive and to be more proactive in ensuring that these entities that are doing the accreditation that we approve are in fact at a level of what needs to happen. That's my concern. Start at the beginning.
Ms. Whitney wanted to comment on the body of regulation that stipulates the minimum standards.
We have two things. We have legislation that sets the minimum standards, and then we have produced regulations based upon that. In Sunset Review, we didn't actually go through all of those areas. We looked more at the program itself and not at the underlying law and regulations that sets forth how one could be accredited. So that is something that staff could look at, but we haven't examined that. I do know that the legislature examined it 2 years ago when they enhanced the law with SB 100.
And that 1248 is in this material, is that correct?
That is correct.
Could you
Yes.
point out the pages so?
Is there?
It's in the section prior to the 4 agency presentations.
Yeah. So starting with page BRD 4-3, it talks about the different sections of law, but specifically on 4-4, it's the minimum standards that one has to have in an accrediting agency as set forth in Health and Safety Code. And some of the other requirements then follow that. So those are all laid out for you to review.
And the actual Health and Safety Code language is starts at BRD 4 and goes through until
48 starts at 4-15.
to 4-27, and then there's the California Code of Regulations follow that. Now, the board does have the authority to evaluate regulations, and we do have regulations, and that is something that would be something the board could look at as do our regulations meet today's standards? And that's something that staff could look at.
Okay, and Dr. Gnanadev and Dr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is on quality control. Okay, so we have 4 agencies who do this. Have we really looked at and see all the complaints you get, all the news media who are accredited by who, and how do the physicians pick which ones? I mean, I'm looking at the renewal application. There is very little about quality control there. How do we know that they're doing a great job? Their job is to make sure that there is a certain quality control at the centers. Our job is to make sure that there is quality control with the agencies which we designate to do to that accreditation. So what kind of process are we following to make sure that all the agencies are doing what they're supposed to do?
Well, right now, the renewal process is set up to do what you would call a quality review, and that is to see if what they have is meeting the requirements of law, because they provide us a lot of documentation. I know that you look at the packet and it doesn't look, but they're going to be providing us a lot of information. We have the right to ask for more. We can do that. But the bottom line is they have to meet the minimum requirements to become an accreditation agency, and they only have to accreditate a outpatient setting to the minimum requirements. I don't believe any of them probably just do the minimum requirements. I believe they all go beyond that. And we'll be finding out that when we get the material. So
Maybe that's where we should go with this is.
Yeah, just to take it further, you get a complaint. One of our investigators goes to this surgery center, finds these rusted instruments, dirty operating rooms, and it was accredited by one of our 4 agencies. So what type of process do we have to really be on that agency? That's what I'm concerned about. I mean, normally, as a physician, the way my thinking is, all right, so I got a surgery center. Let me see who is the easiest way I can get accredited with, rather than how difficult one can be. Usually, physicians know which agency will be a little easier than the other. So we need to have some type of a serious quality control, and if we find something, we need to be on those agencies, not just every 3-year renewal application. That's what I'm coming to.
So maybe the thing to do is to hear from the agencies and to ask the agencies as they present how they address problems that occur. And then tomorrow, when we talk about the program, we can look at our own accountabilities around the accreditation process. But I think rather than asking Kurt, what's his name? Right, the soon-to-be former medical board attorney. Why don't we, I think, given what time it is, I think it would be helpful if we hear from each of the agencies and then save our questions for the agencies, and then tomorrow, if we have overriding issues around our accountabilities and how we exercise them, we can deal with that tomorrow. So unless I hear I'm sorry, I cut you off. Yes, go ahead.
What is that? I just learned that the ACS, which is exempted if they are certified to participate in Medicare programs, so who accredited them? Medicare's own accreditation program?
I believe they're accredited by CMS, aren't they?
they're, the people who can accredit a Medicare program are approved by CMS.
Right. So is any one of these 4?
Yes.
Three of
us are. 3 of us are.
3 of them are.
3 of them are.
So 3 of you go through 2 accreditation processes.
Correct. So Medicare has already vetted us before you even have to.
Right. The question I asked because I think usually Medicare is pretty tight about that.
They're quite tight.
The second is that I'm new to the board. Is that something that first time we deal with, or we have do the renewal? We have done the renewal like 2 years ago, 3 years ago?
The last renewal was a little over 3 years ago, because we're running a little late on the renewal, so.
Because I think what we can learn, because I can see the practice environment changing, the number and type of procedure which is being done is changing every year. we can look at the data from the first round that we have. We can actually be more proactive, asking questions for agency to supply data for us, rather than for them to give it to us, we look at it and say, oh, we are not happy, we want more. I think we drag on more.
Well, during this renewal process, we actually have to collect more information from them because of the passage of SB 100.
So in some ways, this is a new accreditation because of what SB, is it, what you're saying is this is a different accreditation?
Well, the SB 100 added additional requirements. So.
Okay. Can I move to the agencies? Okay, great. And we have 4 agencies. Thank you all for coming, by the way. We're going to start with the AAAHC. Ms. Kurtz and Ms. Wei.
Thank you.
And I just, to all 4 agencies, I was struck as I was going through your presentations that none of you provided data.
Yeah.
You described your process, but I didn't get a sense reading through here of, any of the statistics around how many agencies you accredit, how many centers and so on. So
Excuse me.
if you could
We have
incorporate.
8 million procedures to present.
Huh?
We have 8 million procedures data to present.
Oh, okay. Great. How long will that take?
They should all be at the same table.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I'm Carolyn Kurtz, the General Counsel and Vice President of Government Affairs for AAHC, and with me is Mary Wei, the Assistant Director of Accreditation Services. And we appreciate being invited here to California. Obviously, coming from Illinois, we're happy to be here. And we understand the concerns of this board. We want you to know is that AAHC has been accrediting ambulatory healthcare organizations for over 34 years, and in fact, close to 35 years. We are the largest accreditor of ambulatory healthcare organizations in the country. We are deemed, as was just said, by CMS to do Medicare certified ASCs. In addition, we are recognized in every state that mandates accreditation for both licensed ambulatory surgery centers as well as office-based surgery centers. We understand that in the state of California, there are primarily non-licensed ambulatory surgery centers and office-based surgery centers and all different kinds in between. But in other states where there's a clearer differential, AAHC is in fact recognized in every state. So AAHC, the mission is to promote its position as the preeminent leader in developing standards to advance and promote patient safety, quality, and value and measurement of performance for ambulatory health care through peer-based accreditation processes, education, and research. And we did bring a copy of our annual report, which goes through more specifically numbers and goes over some general things about our organization in addition to what I'll be going through today. But with that said, what I want to explain about AAHC is that we have 18 member organizations who represent providers who practice in the ambulatory arena. And those include the Ambulatory Surgery Foundation, among others, the American Academy of Dermatology, ACOG, ADA, AORN, and ASA. But there are 18 total. And they actually appoint the members to our board. Then we have primarily 3 committees that run the accreditation organization. We have our standards committee, which each year publishes standards for revision and in our standards handbook. These are published for public comment, and then they are approved at a November board meeting as final for the year. So as the discussion was about the minimum standards that are contained within the California law, this in fact includes your minimum standards as well as all of the AAHC standards. We also have a committee which oversees the surveyors. There are about 345 AAHC surveyors who are primarily part-time employees of AAHC. They are active in the ambulatory healthcare environment. AAHC provides the training through the Surveyor Training and Education Committee. They're retrained on-site every 2 years. They go through annual retraining through webinars for the standards and are trained as needed as developments occur in the ambulatory healthcare environment. And then in addition, we have our accreditation committee, which is a board committee which approves the decisions for the accreditation of organizations. sorry. So basically, we wanted to go through, I wanted to give you that background before we went into describing the process that we go through. And then we also want to address, again, because we do, as many of the other accrediting bodies here, operate in the 50 states as well as for the federal government, that we wanted to go through specifically what we do in the state of California. And we do tailor, again, depending on the state requirements. We have very specific requirements in certain states for certain programs. So in California, we have very detailed requirements for our California surveys. And we've been doing these surveys since the inception, as was stated in 1995, of your law requiring accreditation of outpatient facilities. So we do have quite a history in this, and our surveyors are well trained in doing the surveys within the state of California. So basically, before the survey, let's see, oh, sorry, let me go back. Our organizations will, and again, in terms of choosing accrediting organization, as you all pointed out, there are 4 that are approved. And what we basically find is that organizations will choose an accrediting organization based on the comfort with the culture of the standards. How are the standards written? Does it appeal to them? They talk to their peers. They find out who went through a process. Oftentimes it's, an administrator in an ASC has gone through the process with one of the accreditors and moves somewhere else and says, you know what, I'd like to take the organization through that process because I'm familiar with it. I enjoyed the survey. The 888C survey, we like to think, is educational and consultative, that we really help our organizations try to continuously improve the patient care that they're doing. And that is very important. That's paramount to our mission. So it's a continuous quality improvement mission of 888C. And we like to think that the organizations choose us, they wish to partake in that. So with that said, if they've chosen 888C as an accreditor, they come, we determine their survey eligibility. That's sort of the first point. And they have to basically qualify to have a survey from 888C. They have to be providing healthcare services basically greater than 6 months prior to a survey in order to ensure that they are in fact even going to be able to get a 3-year term of accreditation if they achieve accreditation. We do have an early option survey for organizations that have been in existence for less than 6 months. And again, because in California, your organizations cannot do higher levels of anesthesia without being accredited. If you have a new organization, for example, a gastroenterology office, some office where their livelihood is to bill these procedures, they need accreditation sooner, otherwise they can't operate. So we do have an early option survey, and this is the case in other states as well, where a surveyor will go on site and the organization will have all the policies and procedures in place. They may have all of the things set up, but they don't have the history. So as Mary will go into greater detail about what that survey looks like, not everything can be done in the level of detail that we would like to see. So with that said, if an organization is in operation for less than 6 months, they will be guaranteed to have an interim survey either at a 6-month period or a 1-year period, again, depending on how well they did on that first survey. Then, obviously, we require that they're organized and legally constituted entity. And again, that depends on the state in which we're looking at. Corporate practice of medicine concerns in certain states, including yours, they have to be formed a certain way. And then licensed by the state. I think it's very interesting to note, and again, I realize this is unique to California, because really virtually every other state has the ability to license ambulatory surgery centers in greater numbers than we see in the state of California. So you do have a unique situation here. In terms of numbers, we looked, it was interesting, we have about approximately 540 total organizations that we report to the medical board. So in other words, those would be the ones that are using anesthesia at a level significant enough that they would need to be reported. We also accredit primary care and other types of organizations. Indian Health, they don't get reported to your board. But there are 540 total. Of those, we have Medicare certified ambulatory surgery centers, and there are about 340 of those. Of those 340, which are certified Medicare ASCs, we have in our deemed status program, in other words, they went through 888C to get that Medicare survey done. They didn't go through the state. We have about 140 of those. So what's left, really, in terms of organizations that are under the sole jurisdiction, as you will, of the medical board and under 888C, by virtue of that, there are about 200. Then we also require that the organization provides the healthcare services under the direction of specified healthcare providers, an MD, a DO, a DDS. And again, what we find very interesting with this part of our eligibility criteria is that there are increasingly, as we've seen over the years, very innovative structures for how physicians practice. And I'm not sure, how where you all are of this, but we find it when organizations apply for accreditation, we'll see that there may be different corporate entities that they're trying to divide perhaps where they bill. And again, some of this is done because insurance companies may have said to an organization, you can get a facility fee if you form a separate corporate entity and get that accredited. But if that organization is not providing health care and that organization does not have the appropriate medical direction, we won't accredit that organization. But that also, the environment is very complex out there and probably will only get increasingly so. Then we look at all of these other requirements. And I just want to highlight especially the last one, acts in good faith in providing information. And this is throughout the accreditation term. And this is very important in terms of the disclosure of the organization, what they tell us in that application. And Mary will go into further details about what we require for California organizations specifically. But that is something, obviously, that we take very seriously. We make sure that our organizations understand information that they're giving to us. They must attest to that, the fact that it is truthful, and it must be updated. And our organizations know that if that is not the case, they, in fact, can be non-accredited for that. And now I'd like to allow Mary to go a little more into the survey process.
Hello. Specific to California outpatient settings, we did have to amend, as was stated previously, our application for survey in order to collect some of those details that SB 100 required. Now, some of those details included specific individual owners, their medical licenses, the percentage of ownership, contact information, et cetera. So we did have to amend our process and our application, actually, to collect that information. We also ask organizations to identify what level of anesthesia they're providing so that we can be sure that whether or not they meet that threshold for your oversight. And we also now ask them, actually we ask them twice. We ask them in the application and we ask them during the on-site visit to basically attest to whether or not they've ever been denied accreditation through any of our other AO counterparts. They have to, if they have been denied accreditation, provide us a copy of the survey report, which we then have to review and also then review on site with them. So we have asked organizations to provide more information in greater detail for the state of California. After an application has been received and after it's been reviewed for completeness, we do schedule an on-site visit. We work with the organization to schedule an optimum time for survey. And the reason why we do this is to make sure that there's a case to review. We like to observe a procedure during our on-site visit, and that lets us see the policies in action. It lets us, it lets the organization show how it's implemented, for example, its infection prevention program and all of those other factors. And as we've moved on to our on-site visit, let's go on to our on-site survey. While we're on site, like I said, we review documents related to related to the organization, specific to what we require in our standards. So we ask them to have standards related to credentialing and privileging, or policies and procedures related to risk management, quality improvement, peer review, infection prevention, as I've mentioned. And we review all of that during our on-site visit. Now, our on-site visit isn't just about document review. We do, like I said, review a case. We observe a procedure. Our surveyors conduct interviews with the staff to determine understanding and thorough implementation of these policies so that we can make sure that we're not just accrediting a set of paperwork documents, that we're in fact accrediting a whole organization. And that's what we like to think when we go out to accredit a facility, that it's not just a place or a location. It's also the people in it. It's the providers giving care. It's the front staff. It's, the back staff. Our surveyors, well, actually, I also have to mention that prior to the survey, we ask our organizations who have applied for a survey to post a notice of accreditation 30 days leading up to the visit. The reason for that is to allow patients, employees, members of the public, whomever, to notice, oh, this organization is going through a survey, and to know that they are allowed to speak to our surveyors if they have any concerns, and they can speak confidentially to our surveyors. In fact, we have had that occur in some of our surveys in California, specifically. But that allows members of the public to have an impact in the accreditation process. Okay. All right. Surveyors will also, during the on-site visit, look and make sure that an organization is complying not only with the standards as they stand at that time, but that they've continued to comply. So in cases where organizations are renewing their accreditation, we look at how they've complied as our standards have changed. We also look at how they've corrected any deficiencies that might have been cited during the previous visit. Our surveyors, again, observe a procedure to identify how the policies have been implemented, and our surveyors work very consultatively with the organization, highlighting any areas of concern and making sure that the organization has the appropriate structure, mechanism to implement corrections for those areas. Specific for our California organizations during the on-site visit, do you want to talk about? I'll turn it over to Carolyn.
And I apologize, we garbled one of your sections in numbers here. But yes, we do. Our surveyors are given the requirements of, obviously, of the California statutory requirements, which include, again, your standards, which mostly are included in our standards normally anyway, but then the additional requirements such as the posting of the accreditation certificate, the posting that the physician is licensed by the board, all of those additional things that you all have in your law, our surveyors are checking for on site as well. And then again, of course, they are, as Mary said, checking for compliance with any previously cited deficiencies. And then, once they are done, they complete a survey report form, which is sent back to AAHC offices. And again, it's on a California survey. You have a physician MD, and many of our surveys are actually larger, so they may include more than one surveyor in California. I'm not sure the statistics on how they break down, but again, they are scoped according to our scoping criteria for the number of operating rooms, the number of physicians, the number of specialties. So based on that, we determine the number of surveyors, and the MD surveyors are on those surveys. Then after the survey, the surveyors will submit a survey report electronically back to AAHC offices, where basically the AAHC staff go through it for a quality control check. And I'll turn it back to Mary because she works with the accreditation committee and describe the process after that.
Sure. The report then is reviewed by members of our accreditation committee in order to determine an accreditation decision. And that, we have a 3-year term of accreditation, but as Carolyn said before, there are segments of our population that perhaps require more oversight than a 3-year once every 3 years would allow. So that's where our accreditation committee steps in and determines, based on the severity of the deficiencies, if there are in fact severe deficiencies, if either we deny accreditation or if we say, this could be an accreditable facility, but we need to go back in 6 months to check. And we do have those mechanisms. So these interim surveys are scheduled at 6 months to a year. There can be multiple interim surveys. So if they have continued noncompliance and we decide to go back, we can, or we can also remove their accreditation. Okay, so the exciting part is the reporting. Every month, we do send a report of the outpatient settings that have previously, or that have been surveyed and a decision has been granted for the previous month. So we send a report to the medical board with these organizations, and in that report, we include things like the specialties, contact information for the facility, and the list of owners that are, the list of the physician owners within that facility. So we do make every effort to include that in the monthly reports, and we have moving forward from that implementation of SB 100. We can understand, though, it does take an incredible effort and amount of time to produce a data warehouse that's comprehensive. And we actually know that we are going through that experience currently with our own internal processes. Okay, so denial of accreditation is reported. There's a requirement for the reporting to be more immediate than in the monthly report. So we do make sure that that happens when we deny accreditation. Also, we do send a copy of the survey reports and the accreditation decision letters to the medical board, and that also happens every month.
And just to follow up on what Mary said very quickly, that you would be amazed at the list of physician owners. So we have organizations that we accredit that have as many as hundreds of physician owners. So this is the type of data that we're dealing with. And that I think is part of the issue. It is quite complicated, and drilling down to all of those individual physician owners is quite onerous. With that said, and then for really during the accreditation term, we expect the organizations to maintain compliance with the standards as they change from year to year. We do provide all our accredited organizations with the handbook as well as any alerts that come out during the time from CMS, CDC, anything that comes about. We do a quality assessment on ourselves as well as on the organization through random surveys, random unannounced surveys, which organizations know they are subject to at any time. We do discretionary surveys based on complaint, and again, the complaint can come from a member of the public. It can also come from a state in which we have an agreement to do those complaint surveys. So there are states, California is one, I believe, which can ask us to go in. If they have a complaint, we will go and do the complaint survey. And then again, as Mary described, those interim surveys for organizations that we would like to see that they have maintained and corrected any deficiencies.
I also want to say that we do require organizations to notify us when a significant change has occurred. So organizations that have experienced a change in ownership, a relocation, merger, or any types of those complex structures that Carolyn previously mentioned, we do expect notification of that throughout the accreditation term, not just at the application or reapplication process.
Okay, thank you very much. And I want to give...
Well, this is a question I'm going to have for all of them, and that is, you said you had about 200 accredited, 200 that you report to us.
No, we actually, well, we report currently about...
I'm talking about just to the medical board.
No, we report, okay. Yeah, we report to you 540 because we are reporting organizations that we accredit that are either, they're Medicare certified, okay, right, or they're through our deemed status, their deemed status Medicare came from us. Yes. And then those that are not Medicare certified, there are 200 that are not Medicare certified, basically. And so about 540 total that we're reporting to you currently.
And how long will it take of, I would assume some of that 540 is in compliance. That is to say, we have all the requisite information. Mm-hmm. Some of that 540, probably not. So what is your process to resurvey those centers that have not provided all the accurate information? When can this board expect to get all that information?
Well, I mean, I think that, we've been through, and we have been through a similar process in another state, where we, if we're going out, if we're doing a survey and we're getting the application, obviously that's when we get the information. So basically, if you have 3-year terms of accreditation, right, and your implementation had been a year ago, January, right, there may be some from the very beginning, they were coming to the ends of their terms, right, next year that we didn't have all of that information in our own database. So we do have the ability, obviously, to go back to those organizations, right, and get the information from them.
So, I understand it is, if you know that you have inadequate information, you wait until that surgery center is up for reapplication, which could be next week, next year. It depends on when they were first certified.
No, we had the information. For some of the existing organizations, we had the information in our database. Again, understand that it sounds like it's not that complicated, but when you look at the ownership structure, what you get are sometimes you don't get. The ownership may be a partnership, a private trust, and then you have to go down to find the individual, right?
I understand that.
So some of our information on those organizations, we had ownership information. Some of it were physician ownership, and we were great, and some was not. So I can't tell you that we have given you 100% of that group. Can we go back and attempt to, get it from these organizations? Yes, we can.
You can resurvey them, if you will, or do an addendum to your first survey saying, I need this additional information.
Yes.
Are you guys is that part of your plan right now?
Yes, we can, sure.
No, we can't.
Yes,
I know.
yes.
So is it part of the plan
Yes,
right
because
now?
I believe because we received we just received the renewal application for our application to you all.
Great.
So as part of that process, we will do that, yes.
Do you know how long it will take for you to get all that information? So the 540 or so, we have all the information so we can report it on our website?
Uh-huh.
Sure, and we have been reporting on a monthly basis since last year, every owner in the facilities that we report. So usually on a monthly basis, we report somewhere in the neighborhood of maybe 20 to 30 facilities. So if you kind of do the math, then we've reported a portion of that at least, not to mention the baseline reporting we did in the January of 2012, and also in June of 2012. So there has been reports, lists of owners, and all of that.
No, but I understand your question is 100%, correct? Your question is when, right.
That's the expectation that,
yes.
Well, the expectation of this board is that we comply 100% with the law.
No, and we understand that. And certainly, as in other states, again, as I said, we've had this issue in other states. And if we can work cooperatively with you, I think as Kurt's right. If we can get a list, in other words, if we can get a list of what's missing, because again, we submitted monthly, we submitted, right, and so now we've had some, and some of them, the ones that we had that were accredited may have lapsed. So in terms of, really getting you the prime data, it would be nice to work cooperatively. So if they could tell us, you are missing these organizations, then it certainly makes it, much more efficient for us to go back and say, okay, we're going to get all these organizations. So any help that we can get, but obviously we're going to work as quickly as we can to ascertain which portion you don't have the data on, and we'll get the data for you.
Okay. Dr. Solomonson and then Dr. Gnanadev.
Well, I liked your presentation, and I like Mary's comment on it's not just a building, it's the people in the building doing the care. As you well know, we don't license to specialty in California, so we rely on credentialing in hospitals to keep me as a plastic surgeon from doing cardiac surgery, in addition to my conscience. That wouldn't allow me anyway, but in addition to that, I wouldn't be privileged to do it. What does your agency do, or accrediting agency, to look at the privileging of the surgeons using your accredited facilities?
Our standards include standards on credentialing and privileging, and requirements that they perform their own credentialing and privileging, meaning that they can't just accept or adopt another organization's credential investigation that they did. They have to conduct their own. So they can do that through a CVO. They can do that themselves, a credentials verification organization, and they can do that, or they can do that themselves. A lot of organizations, depending on how big or small it is, will choose one or the other. So I hope I'm answering your question.
Well, I mean, the CVO I'm familiar with is that they went to medical school. I mean, that's kind of what I know about, like the FSMB's credentialing, but I guess I'm wondering about...
They can't hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I guess I'm wondering about, for surgery, what sort of proof a given provider would provide to an agency that they are trained to do that surgical procedure. I guess I'm just beating around the bush. Do they have to be board certified in a specialty?
We do not require board certification
or eligibility. We understand not everyone immediately, obviously, coming out of training will be certified. So board eligibility is the level?
We don't actually have a set specific requirement. We ask organizations to identify their process by which they credential their providers. So they have to present to us, how their governing body accepts their clinicians, accepts their providers, and privileges those providers to provide services at that center.
So each of the ones you accredit might have a different process?
Correct.
Interesting.
Right, and also then the surveyor, when the surveyor goes on site, the surveyor pulls these privilege and credentialing files. And then it's also expected in the quality improvement. So if you were, so they basically go through the organization presents its policies, right, for doing this. The surveyor randomly pulls the privilege and credentialing files of, however, depending on the size of the organization, they randomly pull and see what the organization has done. Did they do what they said, how they would privilege these people? And then they'll look at if they have adverse events. There's an adverse event reporting requirement that they have to have that system. So they'll look and see, is there a provider who has had adverse events? So it all ties back into the quality improvement. So if there's an issue with the privileging, that's how it comes up. So it's all tied together.
Yeah, and we also expect them to have a robust peer review program. So they have to, even in a solo setting, get somebody to peer review their cases so that they can make sure that all of their set criteria are being met. But they do set their own criteria.
And I want to say to the other three accrediting agencies, those two questions you will each be asked. So,
Yeah, I don't want to keep you, right, but peer review in a solo setting is also an intriguing question with HIPAA requirements. I'd be curious how that happens, but I don't know that we have time for that.
Dr. Gnanadev?
You mentioned about random surveys. How often, what percentage of surgery centers get random surveys, and how often are there surprise visits than scheduled visits?
Oh. They're always surprised. They're always very surprised. Yeah, so it varies between, I'd say between 5 to 10% of organizations.
And if you find something, do you report that to medical board?
Under your law, yeah, sure, we certainly do.
Even though they're certified by you the last time you went for accreditation, but in your surprise visit you find deficiencies. And do you send that report to the medical board immediately?
Yes, because that's a survey report.
Yes.
That generates a survey report.
Those survey reports generate the most questions.
Yes. Yes.
Dr. Ip?
I have a question that you're accredited for 3 years. To me, it's good and bad. It's a safe labor, but things change a lot in 3 years. I know you're unannounced 10%, 20% of the time. Do you require your center that you accredit give you like a quarterly statistic as far as number of cases, variety of cases, and infection rate, admission rate to the hospital, etc.? The reason I ask is that when you first, going for 6 months and you get a credit and they start marketing, they may be doing 5 cataracts a day, and then 6 months later, a year later, they're doing 15 cataracts a day. And there's a question, do you know that? And are you tracking those statistics to give you some warning whether you need to go back again? For example, if someone doing 20 cataracts a day, you're going to wonder, do they have enough time to sterilize the rooms, etc.? Are there things that, this question to all the agencies, is there things that you do to catch the error that can be made in the process growing? 3 years to me is quite a long period of time. And the reason that your organization, we also, the consumer, we like us to tell them. So we go to that center. I know you're reporting on the ownership, which is not a big issue to me. I'm more concerned about the outcome and the quality. As a surgeon, I'm seeing people doing laparoscopic cholecystectomy in the surgery center. I'm seeing 20, 30 colonoscopy done a day. Are we doing our job to make sure that those quality outcomes are acceptable? Do you have mechanism for that?
I think that's a great question. We do track statistics of, how many procedures, how many adverse events do you have. We do track that through our application and our renewal application. In between, we do ask our organizations to tell us when they've had adverse events. We also monitor the media for any adverse events that hit the stage, so to speak. And we're able to act very quickly to either survey those facilities that have those unfortunate outcomes. And we do take those to our accreditation committee directly when we find that there has been.
Those are after the fact. You don't want that to happen.
It is after the fact.
Yes.
Yes. A survey is a point in time. So it is very difficult for us to be around 24 hours a day, 7 days a week at each facility. That's not, I'm not intending to say that an excuse. It's more a explanation on, what the, I guess, limitations of the accreditation processes could be.
Ms. Yaroslavsky?
Just turn my question into suggestion, so.
Yes.
Okay, so I apologize, but I'm going to have the same question for all of the people that are presenting. And I'm going to suggest that you address these issues, because our concerns are, we understand that you are the entities that accredit the surgery centers. This is something that this board was not aware of prior to, let's say, 2 years ago. Trust me on this one, just accept it, okay? So now that we know that our responsibility is in the oversight of the accreditation entities, we take our job very seriously. This is a very serious situation. So there's things like what we want to know, assuming that we believe that the minimum standards are appropriate, and I'm not there yet. Understand, I'm not there yet. But I want to know when bad outcomes happen, when I understand bad outcomes can happen regardless of the preparation and the ability of the doctor. For good things happen to bad things happen to good people. Remember what happens to whom. So I want you to understand, I understand that. So I'm directing the question now to you, but I think that every one of these accreditation entities that are coming before us today have to explain to us what happens when you find something wrong happening. What is your process by reporting? Who do you report to? Do you have the ability to shut down a facility? What is the timeline? What is the time? No, seriously, because it's not happened. So I'm not saying you haven't done it, but the media knows and we don't know.
Right. No, we first and foremost, we have no ability to close down any organization.
So what happens when you find out that one of your surgery centers has done something that would cause an issue to need to be further?
So your only tool is to withdraw.
Withdraw the accreditation, yes. Correct.
You withdraw do you make a report to the police department, to the Attorney General's office?
No, as a matter of fact,
in
states where we have a reporting requirement, because, and understand, I guess, let's go back 30 years at the beginning of this. I think accreditation, again, was a peer review process that was entered into, voluntarily by organizations that were interested in quality improvement.
Good.
And this was, right, and this is what it was, and this is how it began. Now, over the years, clearly, we've become quasi-regulatory. But with that said, we don't have regulatory powers. So what we do is, and as part of the peer review process, the idea was that what the accreditation organization saw in the accredited organization that invited us in was actually privileged, and that we wouldn't report out because, again, it was like a peer review in a hospital. The idea was to openly discuss and have quality improvement based on those discussions and what was seen. And that was the original idea of accreditation. Now, with that, we've crossed into these areas like in California and many other states. But where the state then says, or the federal government, such as CMS, says, we want to see those reports, we want you to report those events to us, we certainly do, and we report to you. So if we are going in and we have an adverse event, we go in and we see something, we report it very quickly within the time that we are told, different in different states, different to the, everyone has their own rules, but we report it as we are required to do, yes.
Okay, so, and just to clarify, you can pull an accreditation, you report to the medical board, who can go after a physician's license for the physician who was involved in the event or can begin discipline process. And for a licensed facility, the Department of Public Health can pull a license, which is, it is then an unlicensed facility, which essentially shuts it down.
And CMS, of course, if it's the Medicare certified.
They just won't.
They can go in as well, right.
Right, so those are the penalties. I think we're going to need to move on. Sorry, but as you can tell, there's a lot of interest among our board.
Thank you.
And we're going to move to the quadruple A SF. Dr. Jeffrey Keys
Dr. Keys.
and Mr. Terranova.
Right.
Huh?
Okay.
Take it away.
My name is Tom Terranova. I'm the Director of Accreditation for Quad ASF. I have Dr. Jeffrey Keys with me. He's the President of our Board of Directors. I'm going to be very brief and touch on the accreditation process and the standards because Dr. Keys has some really powerful data and things like that that he'd like to talk about that I think go to Madam Chairman's question about data and quality assurance. Our mission is patient safety. Clear and simple, that's what it's always been since 1980 when the organization was founded. Again, this is a somewhat of a peer review system. It's clinical surveyors trained on how to survey, but they have clinical expertise in the settings in which they are accrediting. We do require 100% compliance with all applicable standards. So anything that's required of a facility must be answered yes. If something's not applicable, there better be an explanation as to why. We do require board certification or eligibility in the specialty being performed in the facility. We also require demonstration of hospital privileges for any procedure being performed in the facility. Those are non-negotiable items. Statistical data does indicate improved outcomes. Right now, there are 27 states that either require or have guidelines talking about accreditation either for the ambulatory surgery center or the outpatient setting as you define it here in California. Quad ASF, just like to the other organizations, is recognized in all of them. We're also a CMS deeming authority. The accreditation cycle is pretty simple. There's a 3-year cycle. Intervening years contain self-evaluations really to educate the facility as to changes. Like you said, things change over time. There's also on-site reinspection after that. We don't allow reciprocal inspection processes, so you can't trade off inspectors, et cetera. Also, within this system, every 6 months, every physician in every facility is a mandatory report of all unanticipated sequelae and 6 random case reviews, including the entire universe of cases conducted. That's a lot of what Dr. Keys is going to touch on, so I'll stay really outside of it. Those are our accreditation programs. We actually have 6 programs in the United States. 3 of them are Medicare deemed programs, and then the other 3, which would be surgical, what we call procedural for non-sterile procedures, and then oral maxillofacial surgery. So there's a wide variety of facilities that we're accrediting here in California and in all 50 states. Everything in the Quad A process is dictated by the level of anesthesia being provided. Quickly to touch on the process, you can see the meat around it that's done in dialogue and in collaboration with our staff, but the real big portion is the on-site inspection, which involves walkthroughs, chart reviews, some personnel review, policy review, as well as open-ended questioning with the facility staff. To quickly touch on the areas of the accreditation process and the standards, the sort of non-Medicare accreditation programs have 9 areas in which the standards touch, ranging from anesthesia to general environment, operating room, recovery room, PACU, et cetera. To quickly touch again on the surveyors, our surveyors are all clinicians. Ideally, we try to have the clinicians practicing in the specialty they're inspecting. That's not always the case, but they're still clinicians. We do have a QA process as well. 5% of all facilities are receiving a validation survey, what we call a validation survey. It's unannounced, and it's within a very short time of their routine survey. We also reserve the right to go in as often as possible as often as necessary to ensure 100% compliance with the standards, and reserve the right to go in as many times as needed. With that, again, the big thing, the big draw to this presentation is Dr. Key's discussion of our peer review system, so I want to turn it over to him, and then we'll take any questions you have.
Just a quickie, the number of facilities you accredit in California?
In California, part of our reporting is 282 facilities.
Thanks.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to present today. And, you know, the gist of the question, as I see it, that you're asking is how do we do what we do? And I think I wanted to start with the fact that our board of directors is made up of professors from most of the major universities in the country. Stanford, past chairman of the Department of Anesthesiology from the University of Chicago, USC, across the country, representatives from the Association of Operating Room Nurses, and some lay people. And that board of directors establishes committees to do some of the things that Tom has laid out already, namely the different areas of accreditation that follow the patient through the entire process of surgery. And what is that process? The process is the preoperative, intraoperative, and postoperative management, the management of the operating room itself, the management of the associated areas where the patient matriculates through the operating center, and just about every aspect of operation of care that is delivered. We are able to put surgery centers on probation, and we're also able to rescind accreditation based on their performance. The peer review program, which is of the greatest importance, was established in 1999 by way of the internet. We now, as Tom mentioned, collect every single sequelae all the way down to a patient complaint. And we do the random case reviews so that we have a numerator and a denominator. And what do I mean by that? Well, we know every 6-month period how many cases were done in that facility by all the doctors in the facility, and we know all the complications that occurred. So we're able to take and extrapolate the total number of procedures done in quadruple ASF facilities and compare them against the number of complications. We have 8 million procedures, and what has that told us? Well, first of all, we've had, in 8 million procedures, about 113 deaths. And we first reported on this in 2004, and the statistics are consistent, about 1 in 50,000. But we need to take a look at why the deaths occur. The majority of deaths occur as a result of pulmonary embolism, the same as with all surgeries in hospitals. We also accredit people who are doing vascular access for renal patients. All deaths have to be reported within the first 5 days of occurrence, and some of these patients have their deaths occur unrelated to their operation in the surgery center. As far as infections are concerned, of the 30,000 sequelae, we had 3,000 infections out of 8,000 procedures. That's an incidence of far less than 1%, far better than any hospital has ever reported. We have had nobody die from an infection. We have had 300 patients admitted to the hospital for infections, all were resolved. So I think what the medical board's really looking for is accreditation a viable solution to safe patient care? And I think the answer is yes. And how do you demonstrate that? Through statistics. It's the only way to demonstrate it. So in conclusion, with all of the information that Tom provided for you, I think we are monitoring our patients' care in the best possible way, and I think Medicare has recognized that. Right now we are creating a data hub for all of surgery, not just our own organization, and we're banding together with other surgical specialties to provide ingress and egress of data to medical boards, specialty societies, to improve patient care and to improve evidence-based medicine, which is the new, most important aspect of care that's present in today's environment.
Great, thank you very much. So I'm going to ask Mr. Serrano-Sewell to ask his question. Dr. Salmonson,
Sure.
if you guys can remember the question.
You recall the question, or what I was trying to get to, and maybe I'll ask it better as we proceed. But there's a lot of statutory requirements that this board is required to report. Right. We want to make sure that we have all that information on our website. So we rely on you, the accrediting agency, to provide us that information.
Right.
I've heard varying explanations as to why we don't have it all.
It's very simple. Okay.
So my question will be, after your explanation, or as part of it, how long is it going to take to get all that information from your accrediting agency?
I just found out about this meeting a few days ago, and as president, I wasn't quite sure of what did you really want. And I looked into this issue because I found out that you didn't have all the information. You have the majority of it from us. You have probably 95%. There are probably a handful of surgery centers who have not complied with sending us that information. They just received registered letters that they need to comply with that within 5 business days, or they'll be put on probation.
I like that.
And that's it.
Thank you.
Okay. And Dr. Salmonson, I think
you
question
covered it.
was answered.
The credentialing of the physicians, surgeons, you may want to just emphasize that you have a standard, universal standard. The individual center doesn't set their own.
Let me make one thing clear about patient safety. This is not the wild, wild west, although sometimes it behaves that way. You should not have dermatologists doing complicated plastic surgery procedures they were never trained for. And as a result of that, we insist, I'm going to reiterate, we insist that you only operate within the spectrum of your academic and credentialed training. So if you're a board-certified plastic surgeon, and even if you are, you can't just do anything in the spectrum of plastic surgery. You must have had or have credentials in a hospital to do the same procedure in your surgery center in order to document that you're practicing safely. I think that's of the utmost importance. If you're going to let people just do whatever they want to do, you're going to have chaos.
Great. Dr. Ip?
So that means if the surgery center has 10 owner or 10 surgeons on staff, and you find out one of them who's a dermatology and he wants to do breast augmentation, what do you tell the center? You have to get him off the...
They're on probation, and shortly they're out. Either get rid of them or they're out.
The second question is, I'm impressed by as a surgeon, that all the data that I might hear. If the medical board requests those data next Monday, are those already in the digital file that you can tell us this 2040 center?
Right, but yeah, we can send data, but I have to say something quite frankly. The medical board has to be equipped to deal with data. Right. You can't just get data and go, whoopee, we have a bunch of data. What are you going to do with it? You don't know how to analyze it. You don't have the capability of analyzing it. You need data that means something to you. For example, if somebody had a minor complication, you don't need to know about that. That doesn't mean there was malpractice. You need to know major adverse events, and you need to know is somebody creating hepatitis in a surgery center. There are going to be infections. If somebody gets an infection, that doesn't mean it was because of the surgery center. They go home after surgery. It's outpatient. They show up with an infection 10 days later. Who knows if their dog licked them? So we monitor infections. If we see a problem, we have a whole standard about sterilization, spore testing, down the line. If the medical board and if all of these government agencies start requesting tons of data from everybody, there's going to be a morass of confusion. So I don't recommend you ask for that data. I recommend you trust in the people you already have trusted in to provide safe management of accreditation and give you the data that you should have to continue overseeing the accreditation process.
Well, I'm not asking you to provide all the data, and my point is that we should be able to get data that we want, that the public want to see, put it that way. So I think
well, it depends on what you mean. First of all, there's peer review safety. Peer review has to be respected. If you want people to honestly report peer review so we can improve health care, you can't just lay things out. The public doesn't understand a lot of the data. What are you going to say? Oh, if you went out tomorrow and it was reported in the news, my goodness, there were 10 infections in California surgery centers. A lot of people in the public would say, my goodness, 10 infections. That doesn't mean anything. So you have to respect peer review, and you have to request data that is a danger to the public, not just for the publication to everyone. It doesn't serve a good purpose.
I agree with you as a physician surgeon, but we also have to look at from the point of view of the consumer. They don't look at it that way. They rely on us to get meaningful data to them. We can just say, you can understand my data, therefore I'm not giving you.
No, we can give meaningful data, and we do. Do you require specific data? We're able to do that. Whatever the medical board asks of quadruple ASF, it has been provided in the form of data. Yes, we're capable of doing that.
And we know the data that we are required to collect, so this isn't about violating peer review.
Right, and when you ask for data for us, if we take an action, for example, if we put someone on probation or take an action, you receive documentation immediately of that situation.
So just as an example, to put things in perspective for me, how many facilities do you license or do you accredit in California?
282.
282. Have any of them lost their accreditation in the last 5 years?
Yes.
How many?
I don't have the exact number.
I would have to look into it and get back to you. I can tell you that there was one facility that had an adverse action that was, they corrected the action. We reported to the medical board, and their adverse action was rescinded.
So you report every facility that has lost their accreditation to the medical board?
We report every facility that just goes on probation.
Is that voluntary or is that mandatory?
I think it's mandatory. The medical board wants to know. It's mandatory that we report any facility. If we sanction a facility, we report it to the medical board. Now, if we review, when somebody has an inspection and we find out they don't have all of their MSR sheets, I don't know if you know what that is, it's a sheet that says the detergent under your sink has a dangerous chemical in it, and you don't have the manufacturer's specifications, do we report that to the medical board? No. Should we? No. Because what does that mean? That means go get that, bring it back, and you'll be okay. But if somebody does something that's egregious and they get a sanction from us, it goes right to the medical board.
Okay.
Just a comment, I think that's the type of information we are looking for rather than just a raw data. Raw data doesn't mean anything. That's your job, you're paid to do that job, so analyze it and give us the information where we can look at and take an action.
Thank you both very much. And IMQ, Ms. Samper and Dr. Silverman.
Yeah, I meant. Let's see what I do. Good. The general counsel.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. And in the interest of time, we will not go through the details. You all have our presentation in front of you. I think you'll find all four organizations do a lot of things very similarly. What I'd like to do is focus on some of the things that we maybe do differently, how we approach it, and certainly answer the questions that you've asked and any other questions you might have. If you have questions historically, I have been involved in ambulatory accreditation in California for 23 years, so I've watched this bill. I've watched it before the bill, and it is on the right track, I think. IMQ's ambulatory first, IMQ is a subsidiary of the California Medical Association. We're a C3 organization that was set up in order to focus exclusively on promoting the quality of care, both through accreditation and education. We have a long history in accreditation, accrediting correctional facilities, participating with the Joint Commission and the State of California in surveying the acute care hospitals in California for accreditation, in accrediting providers of CME and accrediting providers of independent review. Up until 1996, we surveyed ambulatory care facilities on behalf of AAAHC, the facilities in California, under the AAAHC standards. In 1996, the IMQ Board of Directors decided to spin off and create our own program. IMQ's board also it's primarily physician board. It is different from the board of the California Medical Association in that it is physicians who are focused exclusively on quality of care and peer review activities. The chairman of our board just stepped down as head of neurosurgery from UC Irvine. Our vice chair is the head of compliance with Kaiser Permanente Northern California. The secretary is a senior researcher and surgeon at UCSF, and our treasurer is the head of the Chinese health plan in San Francisco. We have researchers from RAND, we have a patient safety expert from UCLA. These are all physicians very, very committed to quality of care. They don't get paid a penny for their work there. It's a labor of love and professional commitment. The reason IMQ was set up was to focus on accreditation and care in California. We accredit currently 104 ambulatory facilities in California, which we report to the medical board. Our surveys are all conducted by physicians who practice in ambulatory care settings or have recently practiced in ambulatory settings in California. If we have a two-surveyor team for a larger facility, the second surveyor may be a non-physician, either a nurse or an administrative person also with expertise in ambulatory health care. We have slightly separate standards for solo and small practices versus larger group practices. Our standards, to be honest, when we formed them, we looked at the terrific standards that the other organizations had. We called through them to try to find what we thought made the most sense and work to make them as pragmatic as possible. 36 of our standards are the standards required under law from AB 595. In total, we have 175 standards, so we've obviously added significantly to the basic requirements to assure quality care. There gives you the general categories of standards that we have, and the next slide shows you the types of facilities that we accredit. We have 3 levels of accreditation. We have an initial readiness review, which is designed for facilities that are just becoming operational. You've heard about that from another accrediting body. It's very similar. After 6 months, if they get an initial readiness review, we go in for a full accreditation. Any full accreditation can result in either a 1 or a 3-year accreditation, or of course a denial. In order to get a 3-year accreditation, they must be in compliance with all of the standards. If to get a 1-year, they must be in compliance with all of the mandated standards by the state and 95% of the voluntary standards. There are times where we work very closely with facilities up front. So to be fair, when an organization submits an application to us, we review it closely and we call them and we talk with them and we try to identify areas that we feel need improvement and to encourage them to make those improvements and changes before we accredit them. Our goal is to see that the care provided in our facilities is as good as it possibly can be. We also do for-cause surveys. If we have reason to believe there may be a problem in a facility, we may receive a complaint from an employee, from a patient, read about something in the press. We monitor the medical board's website for issues about physicians. Also, all of our accredited facilities must report to us if, for example, physicians take on new procedures from their original procedure list, if they bring on new staff, if they have a change of new physicians that are practicing there, and any of those reports also could trigger a follow-up action from us. Our surveyors are credentialed, carefully screened, and trained in person every year. They're screened carefully for conflict of interest, as well as their skills and expertise in the area. Our surveyors spend a full day at the survey on site for the surveys. We also have them monitor an actual procedure to watch the operation in practice. I'm rolling through this as quickly as I can. Our surveyors are credentialed. We've talked about the different types of survey. If a facility is not accredited, we do notify the board right away. If we do a for-cause survey, when we suspect there's a problem, we go in unannounced. Usually we go in as within a few days of having a suspicion. We investigate it, and then we set it up as quickly as we can. We will determine the findings from that survey within no more than 5 days, and if we terminate accreditation, we notify the medical board immediately. If the committee meets at night, we'll probably tell you the next morning, but certainly within 12 hours. I'm looking through. I think we've covered most of the questions. I'm trying to remember if there were other questions that I can answer.
The process, do you have a standard approach to credentialing and privileging?
Yes. We have a number of standards on credentialing and privileging. We require proctoring. Victoria, do you want to talk about peer review?
So we have physicians provide credentialing and privileging policies and procedures. We also look at their proctoring policies and procedures, and we also have intensive look at their peer review. We expect them to do peer review, depending on the size of the facility, either quarterly or yearly, and to privilege and credential as well. I think the offset, the outside is every 3 years.
Yeah, one of the things that we focus on when we're doing any of these surveys is looking at the systems that are set up, not the paperwork. So, the paperwork has to be there, but actually monitoring the systems. And we go in, and our surveyors actually talk through how they've proctored, evidence of proctoring, how they've credentialed, and what evidence they have. For example, if you have a physician that has been out of training for some period of time and is doing a new procedure, obviously didn't learn that procedure in training, they really drill down about how they determine that physician is qualified, how the surgical skills are comparable, how many view documentation of the proctoring, the number of proctoring, and if there's any question, we'll send somebody in to actually view that procedure being done.
Mr. Serrano-Sewell, you want to ask your question?
Oh, your question. Wait, I can answer
my question,
that.
right?
I know your question. I was paying attention.
Thank you. No. So you have about 124
104. And we believe that we've given you all the information you need, with the exception of some of the owners. You required addresses for those owners, and we have addresses for the facilities, not necessarily every individual owner. We've been, and in fairness, when we met with the staff of the medical board and all the accrediting agencies last fall, I think our understanding was, the agreement was that we would begin to collect the addresses for every physician as they submitted new applications, and I know that that's what a number of us are doing. We certainly, we hear that you want it more rapidly, and when they're in the process of collecting it, it would be helpful to know where there's gaps, but we can get that to you very quickly.
The other agency sent a letter and expect to have the information in 5 days.
Well, we can send an email and get it to you probably within 5 days also, but yeah, but it's I don't think there's a lot of gaps in our group, to be honest.
Thank you.
Yes.
For the new facility, how do you deal with the proctoring? For the new
facility,
facilities?
on an IRR, the proctoring issue that you're looking, you want to address that?
The proctoring issue comes if they are not practicing with, they're not doing procedures that they have already been privileged for in an accredited acute care setting or an accredited facility where there's no conflict of interest. So there are standards that we allow them to match, for example. So you can give privileges based on privileges that they have at a hospital or acute care setting. They can grant privileges based on privileges that they have at other ambulatory surgery centers where they do not have a conflict of interest, i.e. ownership or family relations and things like that. If a procedure that they are granting a privilege for doesn't fall under those categories, then we're going to say, okay, show us your training, your hands-on training, your proctoring for the procedure that you're going to do. That's the way we deal with proctoring. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Anything else? Thank you very much.
Just, Ms. Silverman, how often do you do surprise surveys? Or any reason, and if you see something, do you immediately report to medical board?
If we see something, we look into it first. We don't necessarily do a survey. We've had situations where you get a complaint from a disgruntled employee, and we certainly investigate it immediately, and you start drilling down, and it looks like there's really not much credibility to it. But if we have even the remote possibility that there's something of concern, we go in and we set up a survey within a couple of days. And I would say that happens for us probably a few times a year, to be honest. It doesn't happen frequently, but when it happens, we move very quickly.
And we report immediately.
Yeah.
To the medical board. The other thing we do, and I'm sure the other accreditation agencies do it but haven't mentioned it, is SB 100 requires that now you receive the report and that you identify on the survey report who is responsible for fixing or for the corrective action for whatever standard was missed. And so that is sent up to the medical board. First, we send up the report as is, and as soon as we get it back from the facility with identifying the person who's going to do the corrective action, we send that back up to the medical board, and then when all the corrective actions have been approved by the committee, we once again send up the report saying all the corrective actions have now been completed.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time. Okay, Joint Commission.
There's 4, that was 3.
It's Joint Commission.
And this is Dr. Berceau and Ms. Hopp, is that right?
Happy, yes.
Hoppy.
Well, as you said, I am Jennifer Hoppy. I'm the Senior Associate Director for State Relations at the Joint Commission, and joining me is Dr. Jim Berceau, who is one of our ambulatory care surveyors. Also, I know since time is of the interest, I'm going to try to glean through some of the less important slides in terms of the background of the Joint Commission's history and mission, and really focus on the issues that you all have been addressing today. So I'm going to provide some background information, and then I'm actually going to turn it over to Dr. Brousseau, who explain more in greater detail about the standards and survey process, because I think who better to explain to you how the Joint Commission goes about assessing compliance with our standards than one of our surveyors who does it on a routine basis.
And just as a set point, the number of ambulatory surgery sites that you...
Oh, sure, I will. Oh, certainly. So in terms of in California, for the amount of outpatient settings that we accredit under the that we report to the medical board, it's roughly just over 150 at this time. I think it might be at 160 to date.
Thank you.
All right, so in terms of, as I think most people know the Joint Commission to be one of the, in terms of the leading accrediting body for hospital accreditation throughout the nation, but obviously we also accredit a wide range of other healthcare entities across the healthcare spectrum, ambulatory care providers, ambulatory surgery centers, and office-based surgery practices being one of those. I'm going to skip ahead through. I do think it's important to note that in terms of the Joint Commission's Board of Commissioners, the composition of the disciplines range from physicians to nurses to administrators and patient advocates. And the Joint Commission's corporate members include the American College of Surgeons, the American College of Physicians, the American Dental Association, the American Hospital Association, as well as the American Medical Association. In terms of the goals of the accreditation process, the Joint Commission's focus is really in assessing compliance with our standards through direct survey observations, patient interviews, as well as staff interviews. We focus on the integration of the systems across the organization, and as well as one of our other colleagues had mentioned, one of the real primary focuses and goals of the accreditation process is to provide educative and consultative feedback to the healthcare organization so that they can continue in their pursuit of improving their overall performance activities and overall the healthcare services that they are providing to their patients. Okay, so I'm going to just move this slightly over if you don't mind. In terms of the accreditation process, so once an organization decides to pursue accreditation with the Joint Commission, the first step in that process is the application for survey. The application is designed to collect information on all the sites and services that are under that organization's control, and Joint Commission does accredit organizations as a whole. Therefore, we do not allow them to pick and choose sites and services to be included. The application information is assessed, and we determine which of the accreditation programs, the applicable manuals, they will be surveyed under. Again, specific to California, we have added a series of questions that are aimed at compliance with Senate Bill 100. First and foremost, we ask the organization to indicate to us that they need to use their accreditation to satisfy the requirements of California law. Following that, they are required to report to us all of the demographic information, such as the name, address, and telephone number, as well as the medical license number for all physicians that have any ownership interest in that outpatient setting that is applying for accreditation. In addition, we require that the organizations disclose to us if the outpatient setting that is applying for accreditation or any of its physician owners have previously been denied accreditation by one of our other approved accrediting bodies. And if that situation should arise, we've also developed a process for requiring the organization to submit a copy of that report that led to the denial to us, and our process would be to assess compliance with those deficient standards from the other accrediting body before we move forward with our accreditation process. One of the other things that is also done at the time of application is the organization must attest that they understand that California law requires us to make both the accreditation report as well as the corrective actions submitted publicly available, and that we will also be providing those reports to the Medical Board of California. We also use an early survey option process for the majority of organizations in California. As Carolyn mentioned earlier, this is a process that's mostly utilized in states where there are law and regulations that require accreditation prior to providing services. So again, that is the same process that's used here. It is a two-part survey process. The first survey, which occurs prior to the organization providing services, uses a limited set of the standards. It focuses on things like environment of care, human resources, the organization's policies and procedures. And the goal of that first survey is to assess the organization's ability to begin effectively providing services to patients. Following that survey, as well as any corrective action that may be needed, an organization will be awarded with a preliminary accreditation decision. And then following that survey, and once they begin providing services, we will come back out, usually in a 4-month time frame, to conduct their full accreditation survey. The accreditation cycle is a 3-year accreditation award, although the Joint Commission does reserve the right to come out and conduct their full survey anywhere between an 18-month window and that 36-month due date. Similar to what the other organizations have reported, we do require organizations to report all changes to us within a 30-day notice. The application must be updated, resubmitted, and then reevaluated to determine if further on-site activities by the Joint Commission are necessary. We have a series of intercycle monitoring requirements that happen throughout the 3-year accreditation cycle. The primary tool being a process for an self-assessment. It's known as the Focus Standards Assessment. Organizations are required to use an online tool to assess themselves against the standards. Any standard that they find themselves to be less than fully compliant with, they're required to do a plan of action and submit that into the Joint Commission, and it is reviewed there. Organizations do this at the 12th and 24-month process of the 36-month cycle. We also do validation surveys. We have 2 forms, both random validation surveys, which is a 5% sample across all of our accreditation programs, for each of the accreditation programs, and we also do evidence of standards compliance validation surveys as well. There is the opportunity for the potential for organizations at any time in the accreditation cycle to undergo a for-cause, or what's commonly known as a complaint survey. In addition, we also conduct extension surveys for any time when an organization begins providing a higher level of service, expands their scope of services to more than 50% of their capacity, or begins offering services at a new location of care. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Dr. Brousseau, who will discuss the standards and survey process.
We'll try to cover this material quickly, but I'm from Kentucky, and we have trouble doing that, actually, when we're from our part of the world. Nevertheless, first, just a few comments about standards development. The Joint Commission develops the standards. It's quite an extensive process and involves participation by many healthcare providers, various experts in the various fields, and it includes government as well, and it's actually welcomed for that participation in the development of those standards. The purpose, or what they're designed for, basically is to set expectations, and that would be both from a minimal and then certainly above minimal expectation for organizations, something to strive for and to be encouraged about. But also it's for us to be able to assess performance. And in the next slide, you will see the accreditation requirements. These are basically the chapters. All the chapters in the manual, all the standards are listed under there. And as a matter of fact, you can go to the homepage on the Joint Commission website and simply select standards and then facts about Joint Commission accreditation standards, and you can see all the detail and all the activity that goes into actually working through and developing those standards. Certainly the California Health and Safety Code 1248.15 for the most part directly is in those standards. But even if one is not, we do have a standard in our manual that talks about compliance with law and regulations. So we have actually another way, even if there is a particular standard that you have that's not clearly stated in our standards. And our expectation of those organizations are in California that they do comply with all of your requirements. The thing I want to mention also that might be of interest to you is what we call a criticality methodology related to the standards. There's a risk and a resolution time frame related to our standards. In other words, they're certainly not all considered to be equal. They're categorized in regard to risk and resolution. We have 4 levels related to that, and we would love to talk to you more about that, but I think you would find it of interest. So all standards really aren't created equally. As important as everything we've talked about is, probably there's certainly not anything any more important than the actual survey itself. And certainly our survey cadre is, I guess for the most part, glad that no one's figured out how to send robots in to do this work yet. It still takes people, it takes trained and professional people to go in and do this. Before I actually talk about that on-site survey process, mention to you that training and education is continuous. It's ongoing. It's all the time. It's not necessarily daily, weekly, monthly. It is all the time, and we have pretty sophisticated approaches to get at that training and education and testing of our survey cadre. There's face-to-face, there's annual conference, there's online, there's preceptorship and mentoring required, there's peer evaluation among ourselves, supervisor observation, and annual reviews, and then the organizations evaluate the cadre as well. There's a lot of review and ongoing evaluation of this cadre. The other thing I will mention as we start talking about the process, and a very important item, and actually we have in our level 1 and 2 in that criticality are somewhat judgment situations. In other words, many of our standards could go to a level that's considered preliminary denial of accreditation. In other words, sometimes something related to credentialing may not seem so severe, sometimes it may seem very severe. We have the ability, and we then actually talk to the staff and the many resources we have at the Joint Commission central office. And those resources are available to us before and during our surveys. Those are physicians, nurses, administrative folks, legal, engineers, and our standards interpretation group. And we're encouraged to use those resources, and they're a terrific resource whenever we're out in the field. So we're not detached or by ourselves out here when we're doing this. There is a great deal of pre-survey preparation that goes into getting ready for the survey, so we have a lot of information provided us, previous survey reports, organization information, lots that we have to digest and review before we go there, and certainly that would include reviewing and being prepared related to California's requirements. The on-site survey process, really the concept is to evaluate that organization, provide education, good practice guidance, and to help staff continually improve. We try to be positive about that. There is opportunity for consultation and teaching, but I always tell folks, but we're here. The baseline is about accreditation and compliance with the surveys. For us, a major part of that activity is what we call the tracer methodology, and that's a case study approach. Much of that is in our patient tracers. On the slide, you'll see where it says individual tracer. That's in the ambulatory surgery center. That is a patient tracer, and some of our time is in what we call system tracers. So 60% or more of our time is in this approach. Typically, for an ambulatory surgery center, we have 1 or 2 surveyors there for 2 to 4 days. There are rules that justify or help the decision process about how many days and how many surveyors, and it has to do with what's done there, the services provided, how many, those sorts of things. Also, it's a select surveyor group. We have a large number of surveyors in the Joint Commission, but not everyone does the ambulatory surgery centers. We will typically open the survey with an orientation, meet the folks, talk about what we're doing, hear about the place, maybe have a tour, but we quickly try to move to patient schedules and selecting patients for our tracers, because that's where we need to be and where we want to go. It's a pre-A to post-Z process, essentially. In other words, it's not only about what happens with that patient there, it's what's done before and after they leave that we have both standards about and we're interested in how that patient is taken care of. Certainly perioperative preoperative and during surgery, all of that we do. And we prefer, and most of the time we're able to at least survey one active patient and someone really there that we basically follow through the whole process with them. In addition to that, of course, that would include sterile processing. We will do that either as part of a patient tracer, or we can actually do it as an infection control system tracer, which again, we do that with medication as well. Follow the whole process of the management of medications, the acquisition, the ordering, the selection, the whole process, administration, monitoring patients. That would be an approach to medication management and a system tracer. We, at other times, and later in the day, obviously in surgery centers, the busy time for surgery, the busiest times usually in the mornings, early. Later in the day, then we go through perhaps the system tracers. We then can do other things like environment of care and the data review session, quality management session that we will always do with those organizations. But essentially with that patient tracer activity, as we follow all the care and the activities of all the people involved, nurses, techs, doctors, everyone, the communications, the record keeping, we review all of that and are basically watching and seeing how all these things are done. That includes following the procedure through in the procedure room of the OR. So we then can cover our standards in patient care, rights of patients and staff, records, environment of care, infection control, medication management. We cover most of those things during those tracers. And most of the time we are able to do more than one of those tracers as well. So that's a critical part of our process. Other things that we do, and I already mentioned, if you go to the next slide, the one I wanted just to briefly mention to you is our approach to privileging. We actually have two processes related to competency. We have a privileging approach that we review, and then we have what we typically often call HR because it's for the staff that doesn't require privileging. They're both quite detailed and involved. For example, and we have to look at the actual file, but we'll start off talking about their policies and procedures, their process for credentialing, the time frame for doing that, and actually the scope of what they allow people to do in their organization. Then we can move to all the things that require, some of them straightforward and simple, government photo identification, verification, the training, and all of these things are primary source. Licensure, the references, recommendations, peer review, both routine and issue related. We want to see that. National Practitioner Data Bank, again, all of this is primary sourced. Their own health statement, and then whatever requirements the organization has for them with regard to health. We'll look at those things to see that they're being managed and taken care of. Then the privileges. We want to see what privileges they've requested. We want to see what privileges they've been granted in the process for doing that, and we want to see how those match their training and their education as well. We'll look at the credentialing committee meeting minutes to see how that functioned and that it happened as well. And then we also review orientation for them related to safety and policies and procedures, infection control, pain management, those items in that practice. For time's sake, I won't go through all the things that we do for other staff or the non-physician staff, but it's very similar in terms of primary base for requirements and background checks and education and licensure and competency and evaluations, job descriptions, orientation, all of those things as well. So those are the things that we do in that critical part of the whole accreditation process related to the survey itself.
All right. So now I wanted to spend a few minutes talking about what happens after the survey. So once Jim and his team leaves the Ambulatory Surgery Center, the organization is left with what is known as a preliminary report of findings. Those findings will then be reviewed by our central office and typically in conjunction with the surveyor to discuss any, if there were any findings that needed to be clarified. The accreditation report is posted to the organization on their extranet site within 10 business days, and organizations are afforded the opportunity to request a clarification of one of those findings. So basically, if they believe they were in compliance at the time of survey, they do have the opportunity to present that information and potentially have a finding removed. The one thing that I just wanted to point out at this point, the accreditation report is final and is posted to the organization at that 10-day mark, but the accreditation decision is not final until any standard that was less than fully compliant at the time of the survey has had corrective actions submitted, been reviewed, and accepted by the Joint Commission. The majority of organizations will have what we call a requirement for improvement, and those, and that might be something you typically more refer to as a deficiency or a citation, but we call those requirements for improvement, and organizations must submit an evidence of standards compliance for all standards that were less than fully compliant. Based on the criticality of the findings, which Jim briefly talked about in terms of whether we have a direct impact standard or an indirect impact standard, their due date, their time frame for submitting that corrective action is within 45 days or 60 days. It is at that time, if an organization submits their corrective action and it is accepted and deemed that they are now in compliance with those standards, that their accreditation decision is then final. It is at that point in the process, when the accreditation report as well as the accreditation decision is final, that we will provide copies of the report as well as the evidence of standards compliance that has been submitted to us, and it is in a format of what action they took, who did it, what they did, how they did it, and when they were going to do it. And all of that information is provided to the medical board at that time. In terms of the adverse accreditation decisions of the Joint Commission, we do have 3 primary categories of adverse accreditation decisions. The first one being accreditation with follow-up survey, contingent accreditation, and then preliminary denial of accreditation. There are 3 different rationales for how organizations can receive one of those adverse accreditation decisions. And the bulk of those are actually when the findings from the survey demonstrate systematic patterns and trends or repeat findings from previous surveys. However, anytime the Joint Commission is making a recommendation for an adverse accreditation decision, that must be presented to a subcommittee of our board. It's known as the Accreditation Committee. They meet 8 times a year throughout the calendar year, and it is only the Accreditation Committee that has the authority to render an adverse accreditation decision. Excuse me. All adverse accreditation decisions are also reported to the medical board. On this slide, you can see excuse me, the continuum of the Joint Commission's accreditation decisions. And it's those 3 categories in the middle, the yellow, the orange, and the red, that are adverse accreditation decisions. Both the accreditation with follow-up survey, as stated, requires follow-up survey prior to a decision being rendered and moving forward. So before they can come into compliance, we have to go back on site and conduct another survey. It typically occurs within a 2 to 4 month time frame, whereas the contingent accreditation decision is a more severe adverse accreditation category, and that requires a 1-month follow-up survey. Preliminary denials of accreditation, organizations are afforded the opportunity to request an appeal. That is, it has to be done within 5 business days. And if they do request the appeal, there will be a review hearing panel that is conducted by a member of our board as well as 2 members of the public to review the facts. In the end, though, if an organization should be denied accreditation, that denial would be reported to the medical board. We would also send notification to the organization in their denial letter that California law stipulates that they cannot perform procedures at a higher level of anesthesia unless they obtain accreditation from another source. At this point, too, I want to highlight that all of our accreditation decisions are publicly available on the Joint Commission's website, and all standards that led to an adverse accreditation decision are also publicly displayed with historical reference. One of the other activities that we were asked to highlight was the complaint process, and the Joint Commission does have an extensive Office of Quality Monitoring that does review all complaints submitted to the Joint Commission. Depending on the nature of a complaint, the Joint Commission, Depending on the nature of the complaint, we may conduct an on-site survey. We may contact the organization to submit a response related to the complaint. We could incorporate that complaint into their next full survey if their due date is coming up shortly. And then we could also track that complaint if it's something of a low priority incident in terms of trends for patterns and trends of that organization. I'm just going to skip ahead in terms of, you can read the slides on how the Joint Commission prioritizes complaints, but I did want to give Jim an opportunity to talk about the on-site review of complaints as well.
And first I want to mention that when Jennifer talked about preliminary denial accreditation, what she just talked about was if it comes out of a survey and a survey report. We have the ability on site when we're there and go in for that, what we thought maybe was a regular survey, or if it's related to a complaint, but it can be a regular survey. If we have concerns, we can call the central office, a clinical team is pulled together, and preliminary denial can be enacted immediately, right while we're there. And we'll stick until whatever the situation has been properly reviewed and corrected. But with regard to complaints, you see in the slide there some of the general information with regard to that. But first of all, it's a limited group of surveyors that can even do these particular types of surveys. It takes different training and experience to do this. And the preparation is extensive. There's file and information and planning that goes into this process. The surveyor is sent in. It's an unannounced approach. We're there for 1 or more days, and we can extend that time as is needed simply by talking with our central office. We introduce the subject with a letter to them. They are not told the specifics of the complaint. They are told generalities of the types of problems that are in the complaint. There's every effort made to protect the complainant, and from that standpoint. Our focus is on the complaint, but typically we'll end up basically going through that tracer process. That's really oftentimes what it takes to really cover patients. We'll ask for a sample of various records. Usually we're able to pull in the record related to the complaint or records, but others around that, and then go through the whole process of the patient tracer. So we're focused on the complaint, but actually we may, and oftentimes in that situation, find other issues as well that then become part of a survey report, which again, you would receive that survey report.
Thank you. Mr. Serrano-Sewell?
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. With regards to getting all the information and being in full compliance in that respect,
yes.
Can you give an estimate of what sort of outstanding?
Certainly. In terms of the data, out of the 150, unfortunately, when the medical board first did their data file load from of all the information for the website, the Joint Commission at that point in time was collecting the information via a manual paper process because our electronic application as well as our data fields internally had not yet been updated with that information. So when we submitted the original data file, the physician owner information was not yet in our system. From that time, since that time, then the medical board has been going through the process of just as we do the notifications every, when the organizations come up for renewal. But at this time, I can and I'm more than happy to, we have the data all available and I can pull it and have it resent in a data file for them tomorrow if needed. In terms of how many organizations may not have that information, just as the other organizations explained, we began requiring this on January 2012 forward. While we have gone back to some of the organizations to ask them to also submit that, I know we do have organizations that have not submitted the information. So we would have to kind of go after them as well in terms of trying to collect that data.
Okay. Thank you.
Question. Are the physician surveyors on your team licensed physicians in the state of California?
Not all, no.
So does the Joint Commission take positions like the kinds of medications that a facility should or should not use, such as droperidol?
I'm not aware of that.
Does the Joint Commission have any positions on the use of certain types of pharmacologic agents, such as droperidol, which is the brand name Anapsine, as an antiemetic?
No, not that I'm aware of.
I believe that the Joint Commission, at least within the last 2 years, was focused on the use of droperidol, which is probably one of the most effective antiemetics. And essentially, there's none of the hospitals that we practice in use it now because the Joint Commission essentially was not going to approve any hospital or accredit these hospitals because they use that drug as an antiemetic because of the theoretical implication of prolonged QT syndrome and causing torsade de pointe and sudden cardiac death. Now, is that...
It's not in the ambulatory program, that's all I can tell you.
Well, I know, but that was a commonly used antiemetic even in outpatient facilities. So you have no position, the Joint Commission has no position officially?
I would have, I don't have that information available, and Jim isn't aware as well, but I can certainly research that with our standards interpretation group when I'm back in the office.
I can answer from UCSD. We allow it to be used. There's a lot of criteria, a lot of restrictions on its use now. My understanding was our P&T committee looked at the medical legal issues and felt that it was, and has a black box warning now. They're concerned about its use, and so put a lot of restrictions. We still can get it, but it's difficult.
So essentially, we can't even get it.
Really can't even.
We can't even get it or use it, and it's clearly one of the most effective antiemetics.
Here, yeah, absolutely.
But I think the bigger question is what effect or how strong is your position on the use of certain medications determinant on California institutions to be able to use what they feel is the appropriate medication? So when you come to, so I don't know what your policies are on that, but
well, in our
it does affect us.
In our program, basically, it's what the institution and what the Pharmacy Therapeutic Committee is recommending. In the ambulatory program, that's what we go by. Now, if we ran into some where there was some particular medication, some information, something that we became aware of, we would simply talk to the pharmacy and the physicians and the people at the central office. I'm not aware of any list that we have of that nature.
Okay, thank you. But I think my concern would be is, given that you're doing these evaluations, do you have a blanket pharmacological list of any kind?
No.
That would?
No.
Okay.
And that would just be so difficult to do. I mean, that would be that'd be essentially impossible. We have had some things, requirements that got in the National Patient Safety Goal, for example, about potassium being located in patient care units where people were getting killed with that, for example, a few years ago, and that became an issue. But it would be at that level of a National Patient Safety Goal, not that we would present a list of okay-to-use medicines.
Dr.
I mean, it's
so from my standpoint, with regard to the ambulatory program, I'm not familiar with what you're talking about.
I mean, in a sense, I feel like the Joint Commission has impacted my ability to practice medicine, and I think patient protection is also protecting the patients from having access to the right medications. I mean, we use alternative antiemetics, but none of them are nearly as effective as droperidol.
Well, all I can tell you is from the ambulatory program, we have no standard or requirement or like that.
Dr.
Thanks for coming. Really learned a lot. I just want to ask, do most centers get more than one accreditation, or they just get one, be happy, or most of them get 2 or 3?
I think it's usually one.
You should just do
select one organization. But I have done some where there's more than one of these groups has done that. It does happen.
We have a number of facilities that have come to us that as a second accreditation because they felt there was a value added to it that are already accredited by one of the other bodies, so there is some overlap. But it's not mandated at that point, it's purely voluntary.
I see. I just try to do the math. You have 500 and then 300, 100 something. So it takes into those numbers when we do our job here. How do we gather the data, how to classify? That's the reason I asked. Thank you.
Dr. Gnanadev, and did you?
Just a final comment on this entire thing is that all 4 organizations were started by physicians. The oldest being 1930s from American College of Surgeons, and the youngest CMA with the IMQ. So doctors do believe in high quality care. I think safe and high-quality care is very important, so whatever you folks can do to help us, I think that's what we appreciate.
And that's actually our major goal. You know, I think someone earlier said that these organizations really started out promoting quality, helping organizations provide quality and that healthcare, and that's why they volunteered to go through this process. The world's changing. For more and more regulatory, more and more states want, you know, somebody to do this, and the Joint Commission is aware of that. We have to go through process change ourselves, and that's happening. I can tell you right now, I'm part of a group that's looking at some ambulatory surgery approach where we might have to change some of our process. I mean, it's not just old instead, and we're going to do it the same way forever. So it's changing.
And can I ask each of you, I think one or two of you mentioned that you require notification if someone has been denied accreditation or had accreditation withheld by another agency. Do you all ask for that?
That was a stipulation in Senate Bill 100.
Okay. Okay. And that in itself is not a basis for continued denial?
No, it is not.
Okay.
It is not. But that is a unique process for, I believe, for all of us in the state of California with outpatient settings. We don't ask that. It began in January 2012.
But it's a good one.
All right. Any other questions from board?
Last question. Since probably this is the only time I can have all 4 agencies here, I just want to learn. You know, there's some issue about the building. I see you guys all this building review and all that. I mean, patient protection, not just like pain and all that. I think finance, etc. too. Are we doing anything as far as like a surgery center charging $80,000 for cystoscopy versus like $2,000? Do you have any say in? I'm just curious.
No.
Do you have, when you look at it? Yes.
We review it not in terms of appropriateness of fees, but we do look at charges for to try to get at access the issue of inappropriate procedures. For example, we had a facility that we were surveying where we found a pattern of billing for emergency colonoscopies on Saturdays, and that was obviously quite a red flag, and we uncovered what turned out to be a significant Medicare fraud, and needless to say, didn't accredit them. And so we do look at those things, but not appropriateness of fees per se.
Yeah, we do notice fraud. We're required by CMS to report that.
For Medicare,
For
again,
Medicare
for
purposes.
Medicare deemed status
Yeah.
survey, if we're doing that under the auspices of our agreement with CMS. If we're doing an accreditation survey, obviously that would affect the outcome of the accreditation, and if it's in a state where we're reporting, the state would become aware of that. And we have had a similar instance where through evidently an EMR, I just heard this told by one of our surveyors, through an EMR, the organization was always evidently checking off, it had to do with a heart murmur. So they were always getting the high level of reimbursement on everyone they saw, and so they noted in that way. So it's exactly the same way we would review that.
Thank you.
Great. So if there are no more questions, I want to thank all 4 of you for your time and attention and for sitting through with us till 6:30 in the evening. Appreciate it very much. I do want to ask if there are any comments from members of the public. Yes. Please, yeah. You're off the hot seat. You're off the hot seat now.
Hi, Alicia Cole, and I spoke earlier, and some of you were not here. Just to give a quick recap, I'm a survivor of multiple hospital-acquired infections, MRSA, necrotizing fasciitis, sepsis, Pseudomonas. Ended up a 2-day hospital stay turned into 2 months and 6 additional surgeries. And I wanted to share some unique input that I think I have in regards to accreditation, because during my 2-month hospital stay, I was in my facility during a survey by the commissioning by the accreditation agency, and I won't say their name and who they are unless I'm asked, if you want to know, because you are trying to make a decision. So
I was interviewed 3 times by that accrediting agency, and there are just some things I'd like to share from my own personal experience that I think, as members of the medical board trying to decide which agency to go with, that no matter what agency you decide on, I think first and foremost should be patient protection and patient information. And I think whatever agency that you decide to go with needs to have a means of public input in their processes, public comment, a way of filing a complaint with that accrediting agency, and then also making sure that the information and the data that they get from their surveys is useful to the public. Data without usefulness is just, it's rhetoric. During the course of my 2-month hospital stay, like I said, I was interviewed 3 times. There was a survey that took place. My hospital never wavered in their rating by their accrediting agency. It never changed. It never went down. And what I see today is the fact that for me, how an accrediting agency handles acute care facilities that they've been surveying for many, many years is going to be a great indicator of what they will do for ASCs. As I said, my hospital's standard never was decreased at all. However, during that same time period, and for a 2-year period, my hospital was cited at the highest level of infection control problems with the Department of Public Health that the law can allow. For 2 years, consistently, they were cited for deficiencies in infection control and not adhering to their own policies and procedures. Now, they almost lost their Medicare funding, which is 40% of their income. And during this same time, they still remained a stellar-rated hospital. They had to hire the firm of Hooper Lundy and whoever to represent them and to do a plan of correction. Additionally, while they were in jeopardy of losing their Medicare funding, they also had an F rating with the Better Business Bureau. So I think it's going to be imperative that whatever agency that you go with definitely is keeping tabs on what is going on, not just within what happens during that survey, but also with what's happening with other governmental agencies as well.
Thank you. And just to be clear, these are all for approved and currently accrediting agencies, so we're not selecting one among the 4.
Okay.
These are all agencies that are doing business in California.
Right. Right. No, I'm aware of that, but I just,
okay.
I didn't want to mention.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Before we, did you have a?
Well, I just wanted to reassure her that Health and Safety Code 1248 does require that the facility notify the public within 30 days of the survey that they are going to have a survey so that the public can contact us, and our information is there so that they can contact us. And once we accredit a facility, we send them a certificate of accreditation, but also a public notice posting, where if they have any issues, they can contact us as well. So we do have our information out there when the organization is. Well, I understand.
And just take it offline. Thank you. Great. Before we move to agenda item 5 and adjourn the meeting, I want to take this opportunity to recognize a board member who served on this board from 2008 and 2012, Dr. Jorge Carrion, who's sitting in the back of the room. And Dr. Carrion was an incredibly valuable member of this board. He brought his perspective as an obstetrician gynecologist and of the many, many roles he's played in healthcare in this country. We miss him dearly. Yes. He served on our Access to Care Committee, our Wellness Committee, our Education Committee, and took a leading role in our cultural and linguistic access standards. He was elected board secretary at our July 2012 meeting, and then we lost him, and we were heartbroken. But he was also very graciously offered and came and helped us at the February summit on a joint summit on appropriate prescribing that we conducted with the pharmacy board. So it's lovely to see you again. Congratulations.
Thank you, Dr.
And, there you go.
Thank you very much, members of the board. My experience in the medical board has been very grateful to work with such an accomplished people and dedicated people. I gained a tremendous experience in my profession and also in my personal life. As a doctor, I am a very meticulous surgeon. By working in the ward, I became more analytical doctor, and I will call myself super analytical, because working with my peers, we review so many difficult cases, and in the end, we reach an agreement. And in my personal life, I have friends that I'm going to have for life. Thank you.
So I'm going to now move to agenda item number 5, and could I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
We'll recess. We're going to close
Oh,
session.
sorry, to recess and go into closed session, so board members don't go anywhere. And after that, we will resume tomorrow morning at 9 a.m.